From my personal experience, the number one enemy in the classroom, especially for an inexperienced teacher, is pronunciation. So today we take a look at phonology and how to get rid of this problem, because I had the same thing when I first started teaching that made me extremely anxious, and I just stuck to what was in the book, which is not the best way to go about it, and we will see why. So by the end of this video, you will have actual games and activities that you can use in your classroom straight away, and they're simple and easy, I promise. And to start, we will now take a very quick look at phonology and what the main issues are. So one of the main things, especially if you tend to rely on the course book a lot, is the fact that pronunciation is almost seen as a thing in itself, which is why we tend to avoid it a lot as well. It's usually quite boring and it's not in context. When we deal with pronunciation, it should be integrated into anything else that we're doing, really, because if you think about it, when we do vocabulary, you have pronunciation. Same thing when you do grammar. Intonation as well, we get into connected speech. Listening, very often the main issue is that the students can't really hear the words properly. So by working on phonology, we can help them. Speaking, obviously, and even writing and reading, because while we write or while we read, we're going to pronounce them internally in our head. We will sound them out. So everything is pronunciation, which is very good news because it makes it so much easier for us to work on it. Some things that you can do to start dealing with pronunciation in context rather than having it as a footnote in the course book. Number one, this is great because we're dealing both with receptive pronunciation as well as productive pronunciation. So for listening and for speaking. Minimal pairs, bingo. Each student gets a bingo card with different words. You pronounce the words one at a time, and students will need to circle the ones that they have. The tricky bit here is that obviously we're working on very similar sounds. So you will have first and thirst. You will have tree and three. If it's too much of a hassle, I understand, but great news for you. On my Medium, you will actually find this worksheet that you can use in your class straight away. So in this case, students will have to discriminate between very, very similar sounds, and by being aware of the very little difference that there is between them, then the next step is you can work on these sounds and show how they differ. And as a follow-up, you can ask students to think of other minimal pairs or words that for them are very similar and they struggle with. This will also help you figure out which sounds they have problems with. Then we move on to a game. This is great for revision. So you're working on vocabulary and pronunciation. You divide students in teams. I usually go for 2, but can also be 3. Write a word on the board. Students take turns and students will have to pronounce it correctly. Then they will also have a ball. So 1 point for correct pronunciation, 2 points if they get the ball inside the basket. This makes students feel better because even if they get the pronunciation wrong, they can still get a point. It gamifies it a bit. At the same time, you're working on vocabulary because you can use the new vocabulary that you've shown that week, for example. And overall, it's quite fun and engaging, and you can remind them of pronunciation. Another one is tic-tac-toe. So you have the grid and you write in each square a word that they usually get wrong. The classic ones are vegetable, chocolate. Again, as a revision, you can use the words that you've seen that week that you know they struggle with a bit, and divided in teams again. They will have to be strategic about it because they want to win, but at the same time, they need to pick words that they think they can pronounce correctly. So it's extra hard. Usually at this point, everyone becomes an extremely proficient speaker and they don't make mistakes anymore, which can be infuriating, but it's also very good because it means that they're getting better, I guess. On a different note, you can work with tongue twisters. Students love these ones, not just young learners, adults as well. One of the classics is she sells seashells by the seashore. Depending on the sound that your students have problems with, you will choose the tongue twister and you work on it together. You can also work on connected speech, so what happens here and there, to make it a bit harder based on the level of your students. And as a follow-up, and this is my favorite part of the activity, which again, we're working on writing skills, we're working on vocabulary, we're working a bit on everything, is for students to create their own tongue twisters. So you can put them in small groups, and after you've done one, been through that, they understand the concept of a tongue twister, they will create their own. This is a lot of fun and I love doing this. When we talk about pronunciation, there's so much more than just sounds, but also intonation, for example, which is really important. So a way to work on this is by picking a scene from a film. If you pick one that everyone is familiar with, makes it a bit better, but it can be anything really. And you just give them the transcript of the scene and you show it to them. Now at this point, give them a bit of time to rehearse, and if they ask you to listen to it again, you can, as many times as they want. Then they rehearse it, and once they're ready, they will keep the time for each other. So let's say if the scene is 20 seconds, students will have to try and replicate exactly the scene. So using the same time and the same intonation. They can take notes on the transcript, which is why they have it, not just to be able to repeat it, but also to work on, oh, this word is stressed, it's very strong because he is mad, and that's the most important information. And then let's not forget about shadowing and how easy it is for students to do that in their own free time. There's a great website called Lyrics Training where students need to fill in the lyrics as they go. Another very simple thing is if you're working on functional language, you can just focus on inferred meaning. So you'll have the same short dialogue, but each time students have to play it with a different feeling in mind, a different mood. So one time they are mad, one time they are anxious, they're happy, they're excited, and see how intonation changes. This is great because they are actually working on it, and then you can ask meta questions to have them reflect on what they've done. So what happens if you're angry? What happens if you are happy? How does your voice change? Why does it change? How is this important? You can come up with so many different questions to guide them so that then they will be able to understand more when they're listening, and also to modulate the voice when they're talking. And then you have the maze. For this, I suggest you check out Hancock. He has some great resources concerning phonology. In this case, we are helping students recognize patterns when it comes to syllables, for example. So you have a maze and you need to get from point A to point B by picking all words that have the same stress. So for example, all words that have the stress on the second syllable, and you have to be able to recognize that and get from here to there. Usually I have students working together for this, so in pairs they each get their own maze and they work on it, and then we go over it together. So as you can see, there is so much that you can do with pronunciation that it's not listen and repeat or the stuff that you find in the course book. So my heartfelt advice is to include pronunciation inside activities as much as you can, integrate it with other skills. And also to have students understand and be familiar with the concept of comfortable intelligibility, because some students will just be not that interested in pronunciation because they don't care about sounding like a native speaker, which is totally fair. But there is such a thing as comfortable intelligibility, which is students need to be able to be understood by other speakers easily. This is also our aim as teachers in the classroom. We need them to be able to be understood, not to sound like the queen. That's not what we're doing, unless that's the goal for the student and they need it for whatever reason, obviously. And then I didn't go into it because that's a much more advanced thing, but it is important to work also on receptive pronunciation. So when we do listening, a lot of problems usually arise by the fact that students can't understand the words when they're put together in connected speech. So by working on decoding skills, they will be able to get better and do this. This is a topic for a whole other video because it's much more complicated and in depth. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments and I will make a video about that, on basically how to work on listening so that we are teaching listening skills rather than testing them. It's very interesting, but it can get a bit complicated, which is why we're not doing it today. So this is it for now. So yeah, if you want resources, please go and check out my Medium account. I also post quite a lot of videos on TikTok, so if you want to follow me there as well. And if you've enjoyed this video, it would be really, really nice and appreciated if you could please like, share and subscribe to my channel so I can make more videos. Thank you and have a lovely day. Bye!